Hi, everybody. I hope everyone had a wonderful Easter, and I hope everyone is doing well. This lecture is on lifespan development. And what is lifespan development? Well, the area studies how you change as well as how you remain the same over the course of a life. Developmental psychologists study lifelong development across three domains. One is physical development, which involves growth and changes in the body and brain, senses, motor skills, and health and wellness. A second area involves cognitive development, which involves learning, attention, memory, language, thinking, reasoning, and creativity. A third area studied by developmental psychologists is those issues on psychosocial development, which are emotions, personality, and social relationships. Much of this is elaborated on in your OpenStax textbook, so please refer to that. Everything that I am saying here is reinforced by material inside the textbook. Now, of course, a question that we need to ask and answer: what is normal development? Psychologists have studied large numbers of children to determine norms, average ages of when most children reach specific developmental milestones. For example, the age when you begin to crawl, when you begin to walk, when you begin to speak in sentences, and when you start puberty. Biological milestones, such as starting puberty, are universal. Social milestones, such as starting school, vary across cultures. There are numerous issues in developmental psychology. One is continuous versus discontinuous development. I'll explain in just a few moments. Another one involves nature versus nurture, which is essentially are developmental things a consequence of strictly environmental exposure, or does genetics play a significant role in them? Historically, psychologists have argued the relative contributions of nature versus nurture, but I can give you a little tip right here. It always involves both. But let's explore continuous versus discontinuous development, because developmental psychologists have different views on the process of lifespan development. Continuous development views development as a cumulative process, gradually improving on existing skills. And that can be characterized as a straight line upwards. If you look at figure 9.2 in your OpenStax textbook, there is a contrasting illustration of continuous versus discontinuous development, which I'll explain in just a few moments. But as I just said, continuous development is a smooth, straight line in which skills are improved over time in a somewhat linear fashion. One good example of that is height. You know, if you were to measure the height of a child over the course of their development, you would see that their height grows in a linear fashion. Discontinuous development, on the other hand, views development as occurring in unique stages, specific times, or ages. Other issues addressed by developmental psychologists is whether or not it is, that is development, universal for all children, or is it individual depending on each child's genetics and environments. Stage theories believe that the process of development is universal. Evidence for one course. Studies show that children from all around the world reach language milestones in a similar sequence. Evidence for many courses. Cultural differences in child care practices. Different practices can accelerate or inhibit achievement of developmental milestones. Now, let's just elaborate for a moment what is meant by, again, nature and what is meant by nature. Nature refers to biology and genetics. Nurture refers to environment and culture. The nature versus nurture debate considers how our personalities and traits are the result of our genetics and biological factors, and how they are shaped by our environment. Why are siblings sometimes so different? Are adopted children more like their biological or adopted parents? Is intelligence inherited? Is it shaped by our learning experience? Or is it a combination of both? Hint, hint, a combination of both. These questions can be answered by looking at the interaction between both nature and nurture, usually in twin and adoption studies, which are elaborated upon in your textbook. Both nature and nurture are important in development, but psychologists debate the relative contributions of each. Let us now explore some theories of development. The number of them I'm going to explore with you now is psychosexual theory, some of which I've already touched on rather humorously in the class, psychosocial theory, cognitive theory, and the theory of moral development. With regard to psychosexual theory, we're talking about Sigmund Freud. I know I've lectured about him rather extensively and humorously. Sigmund Freud believed that childhood experiences shape our personalities and behavior as adults. And Sigmund Freud viewed development as discontinuous. Discontinuous meaning going like this, step fashion, step fashion. Continuous, smooth, straight line, discontinuous, and then a sudden jump in development. Freud believed that there were stages of psychosexual development, and he believed that a lack of proper nurturance and parenting during a stage could lead to a child becoming stuck or fixated in that stage. He claimed that children's pleasure-seeking urges are focused on different erogenous zones at each of the 5 stages of development. You remember my elaborating on some of those. The 5 stages that Freud had described were oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Erik Erikson had a psychosocial theory of development, and Erikson's theory emphasized the social nature of development. He argued that personality development takes place across the lifespan, not just in childhood, and it is largely based on his belief that social interaction affects our sense of self, called ego identity. In each of Erikson's theory, there is a psychosocial task that we must master in order to feel a sense of confidence. And there are 8 stages. I suppose I could elaborate right now on those 8 stages, but it is clearly enumerated in your textbook, so I refer you to the OpenStax textbook to explore those 8 stages in more details. And hint, hint, one or two of my questions refer to Erikson's psychosocial stage. So please look carefully at that. An interesting discontinuous developmental theory was promulgated by Jean Piaget, and his theory is largely a cognitive one. Jean Piaget focused on children's cognitive growth and theorized that cognitive abilities develop through specific stages. Piaget believed children developed schemata, or concepts, used to categorize and interpret information to help them understand the world. When children learn new information, they adjust their schemata through 2 processes, assimilation and accommodation. In assimilation, the child incorporates information into existing schemata. The concept of accommodation describes when changing schemata are based on new information. So there is essentially incorporating existing information into the schemata and changing to the schemata to accommodate the new information. Here too, I'm going to refer you to the textbook that describes in more detail the stages of described in Piaget. What you will also find in the lifespan development folder are some really interesting video clips demonstrating some of the things that children cannot do as a consequence of being in a particular cognitive stage of development. Read that material in the textbook and look at the video clips that I'm going to provide for you in the lifespan development folder, and I think you'll find them rather enjoyable. Let us now turn our development to stages of development in childhood, the physical, biological development. And here I am talking about stages in prenatal, infancy through childhood, adolescence, emerging adulthood, and adulthood. Let us turn our attention to prenatal development. The germinal stage, which is weeks 1 through 2, and I know many of you were exposed to this in biology, so this is kind of like a rudimentary discussion of it. And if you don't recall it, well, you know, hopefully after this, you'll be more informed about prenatal development. Anyway, conception occurs when sperm fertilizes an egg and forms what is called a zygote, which is a single cell structure. And immediately upon fertilization, the zygote starts to undergo a process called mitosis. You got that in biology, I believe. And mitosis is a process of cell division. The zygote divides and cells become more specialized, forming organs and body parts. And I refer you to figure 9.7 of the OpenStax textbook. There's a rather interesting illustration of an actual sperm cell just at the point of penetrating the ovum, and it's kind of like interesting. In weeks 3 through 8, we are in the embryonic stage. After the zygote has about 150 cells, it travels down the fallopian tube and implants itself in the lining of the uterus. At this point, the zygote is now an embryo, a multicellular organism. Organs begin to function as heart begins to beat, and basic structures develop such that they will become the head, the chest, and the abdomen. There's a structure that also develops at this particular point. It's called the placenta, and it is a structure that connects to the uterus that provides nourishment and oxygen from the mother to the embryo via the umbilical cord. The fetal stage is characterized by development from weeks 9 to weeks 40. And during the fetal stage, the baby's brain develops and the body adds size and weight until the fetus reaches full development. I refer you to figure 9.8 of the OpenStax textbook, and perhaps you want to pause for a moment to look at some of the illustrations that appear in the textbook. And incidentally, I can't overemphasize the fact that genetic and environmental factors can affect development during each prenatal stage. It is important for the mother to receive prenatal care, that is medical care during pregnancy, to monitor the health of both the mother and the fetus. And one important term that I want you to understand, and it's on the exam, it's a question about it, and that is the concept of teratogens. A teratogen is any environmental agent, whether it's biological, chemical, or physical, that causes harm or damage to the developing embryo or fetus. Some common teratogens, alcohol, leading to a condition called fetal alcohol syndrome. Smoking, which can result in premature birth, low birth weight, stillbirths, sudden infant death syndrome. Drugs such as heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, as well as prescription drugs. And radiation and viruses such as HIV, herpes, and rubella. There are a collection of birth defects associated with heavy consumption of alcohol during pregnancy. Research has found alcohol to be the leading preventable cause of mental retardation in children in the United States. Some of the physical manifestations of fetal alcohol syndrome is small head size, abnormal facial features, and from the cognitive point of view, the individual is showing poor judgment, poor impulse control, has higher rates of attentional deficit hyperactive disorder, also known as ADHD. They are known to have learning issues and also to have lower IQ scores. I refer you to the illustration in your OpenStax textbook. Now, perhaps you recall me in the past referring to newborn reflexes, and some of which I discussed in the context of learning. All newborns are born with automatic responses, and they are responses to particular forms of stimulation. All infants show that. They are inborn and they are automatic. One particular reflex clearly manifested by all newborn infants is something called the rooting reflex. Touch the infant's cheek, and the infant will turn its head towards something that touches its cheek. Try it on yourself. Yeah, I know nothing happens. And that's because these reflexes disappear characteristically before 8 months, 7 to 8 months of age. Another reflex well demonstrated in infants is the sucking reflex. When an object is placed in an infant's mouth, it reflexively sucks on that particular object. Another reflex demonstrated by infants is called the grasping reflex. And that is the tendency for an infant to cling to objects placed in its hands. If you have access to, to very, very young infants, that is under the age of 7, 8 months of age, you may want to try or test some of these reflexes. But before you do so, of course, wash your hands very, very thoroughly. And if you're attempting to demonstrate a grasping reflex, please do not try to elevate the infant above ground, because there is the risk of slippage and droppage, and you don't want to hurt your brother, your newborn brother, sister, or relative. Okay, so be careful about that. Another interesting reflex demonstrated by infants is called the Moreau reflex, spelled M-O-R-O. And the baby spreads its arms and pulls them back when they are startled or feel like they are falling. It's sort of like this, Very, very powerful reflex. Do not test that reflex on infants as well. Now, there are many, many other reflexes demonstrated by the infant, but summarily, they all disappear by anywhere between 7 and 8 months of age. In fact, for an infant to continue to development, to manifest any of these reflexes is indicative of some neurological problem. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to stop the video presentation at this point. I think I'm somewhere just about 20 minutes. There is a plethora of additional material that's in your OpenStax textbook. So I'm going to remind you to carefully review all the material in that chapter, and hopefully that you will prepare yourselves for the exam. What I'm going to do is after a day or two, I am going to publish that particular exam. I know it may seem such short notice between asking you to cover this material and and know it for the exam. But as I mentioned earlier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish the multiple choice test. I'm going to probably publish that the day after tomorrow. And you're going to have about a week to take that test. Now, that doesn't mean you can take that test over the course of a week. I will publish the test. It will remain open for 6 or 7 days. And at any point over that 6 or 7 days, you can start the test and complete it. However, once you start the test, you have 75 minutes from which to complete it. So that should give you enough time for you to to prepare with the material here in development, and also at the same time to prepare with the previous material that I've given you. And, so I hope everyone does well on this test. Look for the next lecture series, and that's going to occur in about a week. So stay well, everybody. And please stay connected. If anyone has any questions whatsoever, again, please reach out to me. And by the way, if it is absolutely necessary, I can connect with any individual, in fact, a few of you, if necessary, through a video portal called Zoom. So if you really, really do want to meet with me personally, reach out to me and we could schedule an appointment to do that. All right, everyone, be well, and let's get hopping on that second exam.